All right, welcome everybody. This is going to be a little bit different video than what we normally make. I have Daniel, is it Hopman or Hopeman?
Daniel Hopman.
Daniel Hopman from the
Pressure Washer Manufacturers Association, otherwise known as the PWMA.
And we've been talking for a while about getting together and clarifying some of the things I think I know.
Right, sure. Yeah, I think you're doing a good job.
We're going to add some clarity around some of those things. And
sure.
I think back to just a few years ago before I embarked on this project of buying and testing the vast majority of the major manufactured, consumer-based pressure washers here in the U.S., the electric versions. Before doing that, I didn't know anything about, I just always assumed you'd turn a knob to adjust the pressure on your pressure washer. I didn't know about orifice sizes. I didn't know the difference between flow and pressure. And when I bought my first pressure washer back in probably 2012, I bought one of these Krensla high-end pressure washers. I skipped over all of this stuff and just waited. But these things, I feel like they've gotten better, and there certainly are a lot more of them. So what we want to talk about here today is just clarify, what is a PWMA spec? What does that stamp of approval mean? Where do these specs come from? And so I'm going to do something different than I normally do. It's to stay organized here. I got my laptop here, and I got some talking points, some questions that you're going to kind of guide us through, and we'll see where it goes. We'll probably pull in some footage from some other videos of us testing. But today's more of a chat about how this works, what matters and what doesn't. And then what to look out for if you're buying a pressure washer, what's important. So let's talk a little bit about the standard, you call it PW101, standard for testing, rating performance of pressure washers. So how do we determine pressure? And then we'll talk about flow in a minute. So is there a standard?
Okay, let me give you just a quick background on PWMA, right? So as you mentioned, I'm Daniel Hopman. I'm here representing the PWMA, Pressure Washer Manufacturers Association. The PWMA was formed in 1997. For pressure washer manufacturers. It basically is any pressure washer manufacturer that sells pressure washers in the U.S. They're basically portable pressure washers that are hand manipulated, so not computer driven or anything like that. Just
so these could be gas, could be electric.
Gas, electric, can be anything from consumer to industrial. But again, if it's a hand operated portable pressure washer sold in the U.S., any manufacturer is welcome to join and be a part of the PWMA. The PWMA was basically formed to help develop standards for pressure washers, and as well as educating consumers on the proper use of pressure washers, as well as the benefits of using a pressure washer.
So does the manufacturer pay to have that certification?
Yes, so to be a part of the PWMA, there is a membership fee. It's a non-profit trade association, but its annual dues is typically around $20,000 to be a part of the PWMA. And then one of the things that's unique to the PWMA standard, which we're going to get more into, is that we do third-party audits, third-party independent laboratory testing. So we obviously pay, and we've been using Intertek as the laboratory that we use. So each one of the manufacturers pays Intertek, and they go out and randomly select your pressure washers and bring them back to their lab and do the testing, and then send the results to PWMA and the manufacturer to verify that you are actually meeting your performance claims.
So some that I've got some. So Ryobi would be a brand that is a PWA member.
Correct.
That pays, and then do they pay for each machine to be certified, or is the per annual, how does that work from a manufacturer's perspective to get approval to have the label on their box?
Yep, sure. So for the PWMA, the way that it works is basically we have the PW101. It was a standard that was developed in 1998, and it's updated every couple of years. The last one we did in 2018 was to incorporate battery-powered pressure washers, as they're starting to become more and more prevalent in the market. So the last standard, PW101 of 2018, and again, we can kind of go through in detail if you want, how we actually test the units. But the main thing is that they choose a couple of models. So it's either going to be, if you just make electric pressure washers, they'll pick like 2 electric pressure washer models. If you have electric and gas, they'll pick, 1 electric, 1 gas, and if you have battery, they'll get 1 from every category, electric, gas, and battery. And what they do is they purchase 3, right? So you can't just get 1 outlier that maybe was a good or bad performer, right? So they'll get 3 of each model, and then they'll go through the PW1 testing standard, and then they'll take the average of all 3, and that's basically how you get the pressure and flow. And again, we can talk about specifically, what the tests are. But then once you have that number, that can be, and we do the testing internally, right? So each pressure washer manufacturer is required to have calibrated gauges, pressure and flow gauges that are calibrated annually, and so you're doing most of your testing internally to make sure that they are meeting the PW101, and then you have your annual audit through Intertech, which is then verifying it. And most of the times we invite Intertech to come to like our facility. Some of the pressure washer manufacturers may do it differently, but they'll come out and they'll verify that our gauges are actually, within 1%. It has to be 1% PSI, 1% GPM accuracy, and then they'll actually even do the testing right at our facility sometimes.
So what is the PW101 standard? What does that mean? Like what is the pressure standard? What is the flow standard? First of all, what is the standard? And then how do we do the testing? So how does that work?
Okay. So good question. I know in a lot of your videos you talk a lot about, and you've done examples on showing the pressure basically at the trigger handle, as well as, using a bucket to, fill it up and time it, which is a good method to, get a pretty good estimate, right, of the flow. So the way that the PW101 is, we have pressure sensors that are actually, they're digital pressure sensors that are, we have the motor over here. It's actually plumbed right into the manifold on the head of the pump.
Okay.
And the pressure sensor basically, sends a signal up to the receiver, which is, downloading the data into the computer. And again, that's accurate within 1%. And then same thing on the inlet side where your garden hose is hooked up. There's another, flow sensor that's sending that data back to the computer. So for the standard, what we do is we, basically set the pressure washer up, get all your gauges, water, and then you have to use all the accessories that come with it. Right. So you're going to use the trigger handle, the hose, the nozzles, everything that comes with it. And it states in the standard that you can adjust the pressure, to get the highest pressure or flow based on what's in the operator's manual, right? So you can't manipulate it in some strange way, right? It's only going to be changing your nozzles, or on some gas units, there's an unloader that you can adjust a little bit. But basically following the operator's manual, you set it to the highest pressure and flow. And then there's a break-in period. So sometimes, if it's an engine, right, you got to let the engine wear in, or the pump has to seat a little bit, right?
I never thought about that. I just took these right out of the box and let it roll.
Yeah. Sometimes they get better as an engine, kind of.
Maybe that's what we noticed with like the Krensla, the older Krensla. I got way more flow than my original tests on like a brand new machine. Right. And I'm like, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, it's pretty common. They get better with age, right? And until they kind of hit the end of their life expectancy, then they go down. All right. But so it's a minimum of 2 hours. Okay. So typically between 2 hours and 5 hours, you're doing your break-in period. The break-in period, they're doing a 20-10 cycle. And what that means is it's 20 seconds in spray mode and then 10 seconds in non-spray mode, right? So you actually want to cycle this thing, right? You want the the unloader or the TSS switch to be working, right? And going through that cycling. So you basically start taking your actual readings. And for electric and gas pressure washers, you take the test is a 30-minute test, and you're taking a reading every 5 minutes. So you're getting basically 6 data points. And again, you're going to do that on 3 separate units. So you're going to take the average of 18 readings to get your pressure and your flow. So flow, you said that they're putting, so there's an input sensitivity. So it's measuring displacement, like how much water
it's not measuring what's coming out of the hose, it's measuring what's moving past that through the machine, right?
Sure, right.
So different than where I'm doing it, I'm going through the whole drivetrain and then putting it in a bucket with a an accurate stopwatch.
Right, and it's basically the same thing, right? Because what's coming out of the nozzle, as long as it's not leaking somewhere, right, to the garden hose connection or whatever, I mean, the water that's coming in and the water that's coming out of that nozzle is going to be the same, measurement, whether you're measuring it coming into the pump or whether you're measuring it coming out of the nozzle, it's going to be the same number.
And then pressure on the head. Now, I would think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that thinking about like horsepower and torque, so let's call flow equivalent to torque.
Right.
And flow, I would say, now different than a car, but sure. I would wager that flow has less drivetrain loss than pressure. So when I say drivetrain, hose, gun, nozzle, right. Debris, I would say that there's a bigger difference between real world pressure and what's measured at the head versus real world flow and what's measured at the head. Am I thinking about that correctly?
Yeah, and I think in some of your past videos, I mean, if we just want to touch on it quickly, you've discussed, what pressure and flow is, right? So the way that they're rated, when you look at the box, you're seeing 3,000 PSI, right? So that's
just
your pressure.
Nonsense.
It's pounds per square inch, right? That's the way that the pressure is measured, right?
Yeah.
And then our flow is measured in GPM, gallons per minute.
Right.
And the way that we typically explain it to a customer, what's the difference between the pressure and the flow? The pressure is the amount of force that you have to basically break the dirt and grime free from the surface. And then the more flow you have is going to be the faster you can then wash that dirt away. So the higher flow you have, the faster you can pressure wash. So you'll see on most of the electric pressure washers, you're somewhat limited by a 120 volt, 15 amp circuit, right? So you typically are around, 1.2 gallons per minute. When you move up into, some of the larger like gas pressure washers, they'll go up to, 4 gallons a minute, right? But it requires a lot more, power to be able to drive that much flow at that pressure.
So why are we, why is the PWMA, why are they allowing this nonsense pressure rating, which is, it's on the box. So if we look at, where is it on the box here? Is it on the box of this Ryobi somewhere? Where is it? Right here.
2,000 PSI.
So 2,000 PSI and then 1.2 GPM. So this one doesn't say it, but some of them will say it. Like for instance, this Briggs & Stratton right here says, if I flip it around here, it says it on here somewhere. So Briggs & Stratton says 2,000 PSI, and then it says in smaller letters, of course, max PSI at 1.1 GPM.
Right.
Which most people, most people watching these videos know that.
Right.
But most people, like in the beginning, I didn't know that. We didn't know that. And then this is rated 3.5 gallon or 3.5 GPM. That's max GPM at 80 PSI. Right. So what does that mean? And then why are we allowing that?
So it is important to keep those numbers together, right? So if you, like you were saying on this unit here, right, you're saying 2,000 PSI 1.2.
Right.
And that's just because the Ryobi brand, what they're doing is, whether you have a 15 degree nozzle or 25 or 40 degree, they're the same size orifice. Okay. So you showed that in some of your videos in the past. It didn't matter, a 15 degree nozzle versus a 40 degree. You're going to measure the same pressure and flow. Of course, your impact is a lot different, right? Because you have a much finer stream, like on a 0, right? So you're going to have a much greater impact force on a 0-15 than you would on the 40, which is typically what you're using doing the the car detailing and washing.
Sure.
Right? You're going to the 40 degree nozzles because it has less impact. So we put those two numbers together, 2,000, 1.2 on the Ryobi products, because again, it won't change based on the pattern of the nozzle. What is some of the other manufacturers, Greenworks, Briggs & Stratton, what you're starting to see is that they are using different nozzles in the box. So what they're saying is that the maximum pressure that you're going to be able to get out of this with, it might be the 15, I'm not sure which nozzle gets to 2,000, but it might be the 15 degree nozzle is giving you, 2,000 PSI. But they, are required to put on there that at 2,000 PSI, you're going to get to 1.1 GPM. And it would be misleading if you went and hid that, on the side of the box somewhere, or put it somewhere else, right? But you have to keep it together like they did here. And
but I would argue it's going to get 2,000 PSI on the moon. with zero gravity, or they're getting it right here with no loss, with no hose, with no gun. Why can't we change this and make it real, like a real world spec? I know there has to be a standard.
Sure.
And so why is it that way?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So, I mean, to basically have a baseline, right? So you said it exactly right. If I change the hose or I change the trigger handle, the different accessories can change the pressure or the flow of the unit. So to keep things consistent, they're always testing it right here at the head, and that's where your rating is coming from. So you can put 100-foot 3/8 hose like you're doing, which is going to get you a little bit further out there. And
it's
again,
like putting a bigger exhaust pipe on your car,
Right.
right? You should have a little bit more, a little less drivetrain loss.
but it's going to change the pressure and the flow, right, a little bit. So it's consistent to basically get your pressure readings right at the pump head every time, right? So now, again, you can go and change all the accessories you want, but the rating that's on the box is telling you exactly what you're getting out of the pump itself.
Yeah, I still don't like it. Well, and that's why I did independent testing, right? So I
Right,
created
sure.
my own spreadsheet, so we knew in the real world, what are you actually getting? Because the accessories do matter. They matter almost in most cases as much as the pump does.
Sure.
And so the let's talk a little bit about while you're so on the standard. So I'm Ryobi, and I send or I have 3 pressure washers purchased randomly. Could be from anywhere that PWMA purchases.
Right.
They bench test 3 of them, like you
Yes.
said, with the standard that they're using, where it's multiple hours and they're doing multiple cycles, making sure the machines are broken in,
Right.
and that's standardized across the board for any pressure washer that's ever tested, right?
Correct.
Then you take an average, and what's the difference between like a pressure washer that has the stamp and has gone through that process and one that is not? I mean, how do I know if it's been through that PW 101 standardization testing or not?
Sure. So as a member of the PWMA, you don't have the option of saying this pressure washer is going to be certified and this pressure washer is not.
Okay.
If you remember, every pressure washer that you make and sell in the United States is going to be meeting the PW 101 standard.
But you said that you weren't testing every Ryobi pressure washer or every Briggs & Stratton pressure washer.
Right.
So, but what you're expecting is that since it can be randomized testing, that they would employ the same standard across all, right?
Sure. So you're required internally. You have your calibrated equipment, and in your own laboratories, you're verifying that every pressure washer that you are selling meets the PW 101, and then you're randomly. It's an annual audit, right? They'll randomly pick, and like you said, they'll purchase it online, or they'll go to the retailer, Home Depot, Lowe's, whatever, big box store, and purchase the units. And you don't know which model or where it's coming from. So, and that's basically the third-party audit to verify annually that you are, in fact, in your own labs, verifying that every machine meets the PW 101.
So you probably can't tell me this, but have there been companies that have lost certification?
We haven't. We haven't. Since the PWMA was started in '97, there's never been a company that dropped out because
if they're paying the money,
sure,
they're gonna they're doing
it's and it's one of the reasons we're here today. It's about credibility, right? So and that's exactly why we're here today. One of the main reasons we're here today is to talk about not all pressure washers are rated the same, right? So there are industry standards like the PWMA, which is basically creating an industry standard so that all the pressure washers are basically rated the same way, and you're advertising, the same performance, right? So to that point, it's a volunteer. It's voluntary to be a part of a trade association. So if you're not, and you're just anybody selling pressure washers on some online site, you're not required to really meet any kind of standards. And that's why you're seeing 3,000 psi pressure washer for $150 or something. It's not possible, right? Greenworks has a 3,000 psi pressure washer over here. It's $400. So, you're going to, you've said it many times before, you're going to get what you pay for, right? So,
I don't know. I've found that, and you can see it, I think this is probably reminds me of a Ryobi induction motor.
It's an induction motor.
This is 35 pounds.
Yeah, that's a substantial.
40 pounds. Now it's a sealed unit. There's no way to change oil or adjust. I mean,
Correct.
this has I'm assuming a certain lifespan that it's been built for.
Correct.
Hoping to meet or exceed that lifespan.
Right.
A lot of these are 100-hour, 200, 300-hour pumps.
Right.
And they're designed for consumer application, not professional applications. But I found a lot that sometimes the cheaper ones perform better for me, and perform, especially for the application that we're using for, which is washing a car.
Right.
So where does the standard? So we have the standard. So where do companies go wrong in their testing? So we talked about testing pressure at the pump head, flow at the inlet, and they're doing it with the accessories and the orifice nozzles the orifice sizes of the nozzles that are provided with the machine.
Right.
How do machines that aren't held to a standard like PWMA standard, how are they fudging the numbers? What do they do?
Okay. So one of the examples that we were going to look at today, I don't know if you want to show this unit or not. I don't want to say they're fudging their numbers. They're just rating it in a different way.
Okay,
right?
got it.
So this particular pressure washer, if we look at it here, it's a 2050 PSI, and they're saying 1.65 GPM, right?
But it does say in smaller words,
some qualifying language here.
At initial discharge per CSA
Right.
internal pressure testing. So was CSA a different standard? What is that?
Yeah, so CSA is basically a organization that's doing a safety test, right? And to kind of like back up into what you were talking about as far as building a pressure washer at a price point, right? So it basically comes down to like qualifying the customer, right? So if you're using a pressure washer, a couple hours, 5-6 hours a day, several days a week, you need to buy an industrial grade pressure washer. It's going to last 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours, right? Again, it all comes down to qualifying the customer for, what's the right product that they need at the price point that they want to spend. So a professional should be buying a more expensive industrial grade product that's going to last them a long time. If you sold them, an inexpensive consumer grade pressure washer, you're basically ripping them off because you're going to have to buy several of them, right? And the same is true for, the average homeowner. Average homeowners are using a pressure washer, 3-4 hours, probably 3 or 4 times a year, right? So, you might be at, 15, 16 hours a year is the average, homeowner is going to use a pressure washer. So to your point, if a pressure washer was designed for 100 hours, it's going to last them many, many years of reliable service, right? So now, having said all that, basically a lot of people do start their shopping, whether it's online or in the stores, by looking at the pressure and the price point, right? So you're starting off and you're saying,
average elsewhere, Daniel. This is making my skin crawl.
What do you
Because regular people.
Right.
Hey, but yeah, I get it. That's the game that all these guys are playing in, right? They're all playing in the regular people world because they're selling to the masses, and I don't like that. But keep going. Sorry, I'm getting all sketched out.
So
here.
maybe average wasn't the right word.
Do average elsewhere. That's our motto here.
Gotcha. Most consumers, most homeowners, right? When you're shopping for a pressure washer, you're looking at price and performance, right? Or price and PSI, right? So that's kind of where you start, right? And then you start looking at, okay, well, what accessories does it come with, right? So what's happening here is if I had a 2,000 PSI pressure washer that's actually rated, per the PWMA, and it was a $150 or $170 pressure washer, you may look at a pressure washer like this that says 2050 PSI and it's, maybe $100. And you'd say, oh, well, I can get more power for less price, you start leaning toward this, right? But if you really want to make sure when you're shopping, for consumer pressure washers that you're going to get a pressure washer that, meets the standard. All of these have that little PWMA certified performance.
There's a little badge there.
Yep. So you see that
badge here.
You see that mark on the product. It's being tested and it's actually going to meet the performance that's on the box. So
on the moon. With no gravity and no accessories.
Within 10%. It's.
But then you can extract that out. So if this is rated at 3,000, it's going to get, in the real world, it's going to get some number closer than when it's rated at 2,000.
That's exactly right. It's all relative, right? So a 2,000 versus a 3,000, whether it's a Ryobi or a Greenworks or a Briggs & Stratton, it's going to be the same difference, right?
Sure, gotcha. So if we have a PWMA certification and I'm looking at 3 2000 psi rated machines from 3 different manufacturers. They're all going to get some number close to the same.
Right.
At the end, if you measured it differently the way that I'm measuring it, you're going to get some number that's pretty close. Now, if you go grab a non-certified machine that's rated at 2000 psi, it's likely not going to meet that performance standard.
So, what the qualifying language is telling you here is, it's just the way that they rate their machine, is at initial discharge per the CSA internal pressure. So what they're saying there is the UL test, I think it's UL 68.1.3 or something like that they look at. And what they're doing is they're saying if there was a malfunction, in the case of an electric pressure washer, it's the total stop switch, right? When you release the trigger handle, the pressure builds up in the pump, right? And that TSS switch is then activated and shuts it off, right? And when you release it, the pressure drops, turns back on, right? Pretty simple. But let's say there was a malfunction in that total stop switch, right? That pressure can then kind of spike and be trapped in the head, right? So that's why UL requires that you test that at that pressure, the machine is either not going to fail or it's going to fail safely, right? So what they mean by fail safely is there's not going to be any risk of fire or electrical shock or personal injury, right? So it should fail safe if it was to fail, right? So what in this case this manufacturer is saying is this machine will activate at 2050 psi in the pump. The TSS will activate when you release the trigger handle, okay? And then why they're saying initial discharge is when you squeeze the trigger handle, you might get that initial just kind of like, right? And then the motor comes up, right? And now it's running at your actual, rated or working pressure. But they're saying that it's possible that you'll see 20,050 psi on that initial discharge.
Now, why do I notice when I'm measuring some machines, when the pressure switch is engaged, you release the trigger, it'll hold a lot of times greater pressure than what it actually produces, and then some machines will drop darn near down to zero and have to rebuild pressure.
Right.
Why is that? Just a choice in pump construction? Do you know anything about that?
I think what you're seeing is just the ramp up of the motor, right? When you initially squeeze the trigger handle, you have that kind of startup power that's required, and then the motor comes up to full speed. So once the motor's running, at a consistent RPM, you should see the same pressure.
The induction motors most of them have a significant ramp-up time, so they don't hold pressure in the line.
For sure.
The pressure, as soon as you release, the pressure switches engages, or a lot of them just run. Probably because it's better for the pump to have it run than it is to turn on and off.
Right.
But a lot of these bigger, heavier, bulkier induction motors, they tend to produce, any idea why they produce a lot more pressure but less flow?
So, and again, a lot of it is the limitations of the 120 volt 15 amp circuit that you have to work with here in the U.S. You'll see in Europe, you have 3,000 psi electric pressure washers. It's becoming much more common to use electric pressure washers in the U.S. I think it's at like 56% of consumer pressure washers sold today are electric pressure washers. But in Europe, it's much greater than that because they have the 240 or 220 volt power that's available, so they can easily get 3,000 psi, on an electric pressure washer. So, with the kind of limitations that we have, basically on these, you have that wobble plate that's turning inside of there, right? And the wobble plate is moving the pistons up and down, right? So, the more, and again, it's all a system, right? But the more water you're trying to move, the more power that motor is going to, need. And when you start going above, 1.2, 1.4 gallons per minute, you really start requiring a lot more power from the motor itself, which is probably going to take you over your 15 amp circuit. So the efficiency game that we're all playing and trying to make the pressure washer motors and pumps more and more efficient every year is trying to get more pressure out of that unit at the same flow.
You mentioned briefly consumer versus commercial grade.
Sure. Yep. And we talked about that a little bit already. I know that at Obsessed Garage, you're basically selling mostly, industrial grade pressure washers on your site. That's what you like to use. But we talked about that where, a professional who's using it every day needs to basically, spend the money to buy the professional grade pressure washer that's going to last 1,000 hours or 2,000 hours. Again, where a homeowner is, using a pressure washer, like we were saying before, maybe, 16 hours a year or something. So they're going to get many, many years of use out of something that'll go 100 or 200 hours. So I just wanted to kind of bring that up in terms of, it's the right pressure washer for its intended use, right?
So what's your take on, I provide people advice all the time, but what's your take on if you are a homeowner, consumer, regular dude, regular lady, and you want to clean, let's say you have a big house, you have a 4,000 square foot house,
right,
and you have a decent sized driveway.
Sure.
And you want to clean that driveway once a year, so you go to the big box store and you walk there and you look at the shelves and you buy the highest pressure version.
Sure.
What is your recommendation to someone like that? Let's say they're going to do that once a quarter and they need to clean this 150 foot long driveway.
Right.
I'm recommending people the consumer pressure washer, you're going to be there for days.
It's going to take you longer, right? So we were talking about that before, right? Flow is basically speed, right? So when you get up into like that gas unit over there, you have 2.5 gallons a minute, you're going to move a lot faster. So can you, do the whole driveway with another pressure washer? Yeah, it's just going to take you twice as long as it would, with something that has 2.5 gallons a minute. So, again, in the U.S., since you're kind of limited to that 120, 15 amp, if you want to do, large driveways, sidewalks, your whole house or whatever, they're typically moving into, the larger gas pressure washers. But a lot of people, that's why the battery technology, is rapidly improving, and we're starting to come out with battery-powered units now because people don't want to deal with the gas or the cords, right? Again, if you don't want to deal with a gas pressure washer and you want to have an electric pressure washer, one of the things you can do is look at accessories. I know you sell a lot of different nozzles and stuff because you're really optimizing them for use with cleaning vehicles. But have you ever seen surface cleaners?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. So a surface cleaner basically has like two nozzles that rotate. And you'd have like an electric pressure washer, typically like an 11-inch or 12-inch cleaning path. So if you do want to go clean a whole patio or something with a 1.2 gallon pressure washer, if you bought something like those surface cleaners, rather than cleaning a 2 or 3 inch path at a time, you're cleaning an 11 or 12-inch path at a time. So it's going to help you get the job done a lot faster.
So what about another thing that we've been talking about a little bit? What about people who are up north? This is an opportune time to sort of talk about this. I mean, in Florida we don't have this issue, but in colder climates, when you're above, say, Pennsylvania and above, say if you're in Wyoming or Montana, or you're in there's these much colder climates where pump freezing is a problem.
Right.
What should someone do with their pump to make sure that it doesn't freeze up? Because even a little bit of water in the head can cause problems, can it?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good segment talking about basically maintenance, right? So you're selling a lot of the fittings, whether they're brass or stainless, and the hoses, but we do have an aluminum pump in a lot of these cases, right? And a lot of the fittings and stuff might be aluminum or brass. So it's important to make sure that when you're done using a pressure washer, you disconnect everything. Right, so a lot of times we just kind of take the hose and we throw it over the top of the unit and stick it in the garage, right? But you have all that water that's trapped in the hose and the fittings and even in the nozzle. And water sitting in aluminum is just going to cause corrosion over time, right? So again, disconnect everything, drain the hose, squeeze the trigger handle with it disconnected to get the water out of the trigger handle, and then to get the water out of the pump, they pump protector. Some of them are just a bottle that you hook up and you squeeze, and you just kind of force the, basically it's like an antifreeze and a lubricant mixture into the pump. Other ones are pressurized, right, where you would screw it on there and then it has an aerosol that basically forces it through. What that's going to do is it's going to do two things. It's going to push the water out of the pump, right, to keep the corrosion. And then to your point about in the colder climates this time of year, it might be doing your last driveway washing or house washing, and you throw it in the shed, and if the water's in there, there is a chance that it's going to freeze and it's going to expand and crack the pump, right? So that the pump protectors, again, it's an antifreeze and a lubricant, so it's helping to protect and lubricate the seals and stuff a little bit as well, but it's giving you that freeze protection.
You're asking a lot of like a regular dude who's shopping at a big box store, buying something off the shelf with a specification. They're buying it all on specs. You're asking a lot, and especially with most of these machines have 2 to 3 year, no questions asked warranties.
Right.
I guess the warranty companies or the companies that are backing the manufacturers just hoping that people just throw it away and don't make it. There must be some actuarial calculation where they know that people aren't going to claim the warranty.
I don't. But I think we hope that they actually do the maintenance and get many years of good service.
What do you think the value is? The value even greater with an inexpensive consumer pressure washer, that sort of maintenance and care, than a professional one? Because the internal components are going to be they're going to be different. They're going to be brass and stainless on a professional versus aluminum a lot of times on an inexpensive sealed unit.
Sure.
Would you say that it's probably more beneficial for someone with an inexpensive pressure washer to maintain it than someone who has a professional one?
To your point, as far as like freeze protection, I think it's going to be the same. If you're going to have water in the pump, it can freeze and break it. It doesn't matter if it's a very expensive triplex pump or an inexpensive aluminum axial cam pump. In terms of that, it's going to be the same risk. To your point, you're not going to get as much corrosion with water sitting on brass and stainless steel, but as you would, aluminum. But if you don't want to actually purchase something like pump protector and run that through there, like on a gas unit, I would say at least when you have the hoses all disconnected and the switch is off, like give it a pull, to kind of just shoot some of the water, out of the pump. And again, if you're using it, frequently, then, I wouldn't even worry about it because it's going to be cleaned by, continuously using it.
What is the rule on, every single one of these pressure washers, and pretty much every professional pressure washer there's a long gun. They never sell the stubbies or the short gun.
Sure.
I've understood that there's I don't know if it's a UL or some sort of standard.
Right.
Why can't these pressure washers in the U.S., if they're solely consumer, why can't they ship it with a short gun? Is there a rule or a law against that?
It is. It's a UL spec, and I believe it's over 500 PSI. You got me on this one for the details, but UL has, I think it's 3 stages, right? So anything that's like under 500, over 500. I think the next one is over 3,600 is like the next. And they require a certain length from basically where your hand is, where the trigger is, to where the water is discharging. So basically the nozzle, right? Okay. So again, most pressure washers, consumer grade, that are between like a 500 PSI up to like a 3,000, 3,600 PSI. I believe it's 23.5 inches from where your hand is to where the discharge is. And then when you go over like that 3,600, then I believe it goes to like 48 inches. So you'll see on the big, 4,000, 4 gallon a minute commercial grade units, you have a wand this long on it. And that's just a safety.
But I mean, it's still producing the same. Is it so that you can't accidentally hit yourself in the leg or something?
It's
I guess
less likely, yeah.
Because the pressure's the same, whether it's here or there, right? They're very similar.
Yeah, it's just less likely that you're going to, accidentally stick your hand in front of it. But again, when you get up into these higher pressure machines, especially if you're using, the finer tips like a 15 or something, you have to be careful.
You can really do some damage.
Yeah, they're tools.
Yeah. So the quick disconnect couplers or plugs. What's the PWMA's recommendation on that? Because when I first started doing this, it was like a no. No QCs. You're going to cause cavitation to your pumps. No one's supposed to use those, or no one will allow those, or we're voiding warranties if we use them. Now it's become a standard. Pretty much every pressure washer, you want to break it down, you want to clean it up, you want to maintain it. We just talked about what's the standard there.
So I mean, each pressure washer manufacturer might be different, right? So I'm going to kind of default to say, like, check your owner's manual, right? But from my experience with these products, there's no issue with adding the quick connects onto them. Most of the big box retailers have some fittings on the shelf, and then of course you have a big selection on your site. So there's no issues with adding on quick connect fittings. So one of the things, again, kind of coming back to the PWMA, we talked about the PW101 is the performance standard, right? There's also a PW 201, which is a standard for quarter-inch quick connects, and that's most of your nozzles are 1/4-inch quick connects, right? And then there's a PW202, which is for 3/8 quick connect, which is on most of your larger hoses, right? So most of the hoses this is probably a 3/8 right there, right? Yep. So that would be the PW202. There's a PW203, which is for the M22, and I've seen you talk about this quite a bit, right? It's a M22 thread, and it has a 14 millimeter ID. Now, again, if you're a member of the PWMA, you use those standards, right? So you're always going to have an M22.
That's why Greenworks, Ryobi, Briggs and Stratton, they're all using 14 millimeter standard. And then it seems the Chinese standard is, or no standard is to go 15 millimeter.
Sure. So I think both 14 and 15 were very common in the market, let's say mid-90s when some of the standards started to come out. And it just causes a lot of confusion, right? Because you go to the hardware store and you're buying a different hose or a nozzle, and this one doesn't fit in this unit. It's just very frustrating, right? So again, that's why the PWMA said, hey, let's create some industry standards and kind of get everybody in the U.S. trying to use these same size fittings, so that it takes all that confusion out for the consumer, and you're going to be able to go to any one of these stores and purchase one, and they're going to work. The other standard that they have is the PW301, and that's for the nozzles. Okay. And obviously you talk a lot about that on your videos, because that's one of the things you do is optimize the pressure washer for use with vehicles, right?
So sure. Yeah. You mentioned a word that I never used. What was it? What do you call it? Spot pressure?
The impact pressure?
Impact pressure, yeah. I'm going to start using that word. I like that. So we want low impact, high cleaning capability, or we want to move, because generally we've put something on the surface to make our surface, there's less surface tension, right? So water beads, stuff runs off the surface, and so we need some pressure, but not so much so that we put ourselves at risk of
damage to paint, right, for sure.
So when I go to like a big commercial pressure washer or commercial car wash, are they targeting flow or pressure? What are they generally setting those at?
Generally they're around 700 psi.
Really?
So they're not, and so I think you're kind of right on when you're saying keep it around 1,000 or less, right? So
because our little electric pressure washers, there's a give and take there, right? If you have, because those pressure washers that a lot of car washes are doing 3, 4, 5 gallons per minute.
Sure, right, and they're using huge, commercial grade triplex pumps with giant, at least 240 volt,
30, 40, 50 amp pumps.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So yes, they're moving a lot of water. I'd say a minimum of 5 gallons a minute.
Yeah, and that's how you get that kick, but you could stick your hand in front of it and it's not going to...
Yep. And to your point, you were showing a lot of the videos with the foam cannons, right? So that's definitely a growing market right now, with everybody starting to use pressure washers and foam cannons for cleaning vehicles. But you're putting a lot of soap on the car, right? So you need a lot of water to then wash it off, right? So the higher flow, lower pressure is definitely optimal for vehicle cleaning.
So what does someone do if they want one pressure washer and they want to use it around the house? And I argue an electric pressure washer in general is not a great household, it's not a great, you're cleaning your deck. It's more for just it's like an advanced hose. I just think you need gas if you're doing if you have a decent amount of property, or if you're doing quarterly pressure washer cleaning. I choose to hire somebody to do that, because he brings some 6, 8 gallon a minute coin injected with surface cleaners with dual handles with an 18-inch surface cleaner, so he can knock out my driveway in an hour.
Right, time is money, right? So they want the flow. Big commercial grade machines. But to your question, if somebody wants to spend $200, $300, $400 on a electric pressure washer, they don't want to deal with the gas and stuff. They can do like you're showing them how changing nozzles, right? So you can put the large orifice on there and get more flow out of it, so that you can use it for like your vehicle. But then when you're doing your driveway concrete stuff, you probably want the higher pressure, right? But also if you just want to use the accessories that are out of the box. Again, a lot of times they'll come with multiple nozzles, right? Like a lot of electric pressure washers come with a turbo nozzle. So, again, a 15-degree nozzle might give you just a little 2 or 3 inch cleaning path, right? Where what a turbo nozzle is it's actually like a 0-degree nozzle, but it's rotating, right? So now you have that impact pressure of the 0-degree, but you're spreading it out over a little bit wider area. So that's going to be good for, if you do want to do a small patio or something.
It's almost like it's like a turbocharger. You're cheating a little bit, and it's like a cheater bar, when you're trying to break something loose.
More leverage,
Right, you get a little bit more work done. Now, how do we know, how does someone who's buying a pressure washer, you're talking about modifying, swapping out nozzles, how do you know when you've gone too far? It's easy when you go too big, so you reach a point where there's only so much flow the machine can do.
Right.
And so you'll know when you put when you have too much flow and not enough pressure, because it doesn't work, it starts to dribble out.
Right, yeah.
But where you can damage things is if you go too small and try to dial in too much pressure.
Sure.
How do you know without putting in an amp meter on the wall and see that you're overamping the machine? How do you know how to manage that?
So I know you've pointed out a lot in your videos, but that 301 standard basically is showing you how to mark a nozzle, right? So I don't have an example here, but there's basically a 5-digit number that's on the nozzle, right?
And one right here, and this one is this one says 2504. So that's 25-degree 4.0.
Right.
That's this particular company's the way that they're doing it. This is a Swiss nozzle.
Yep. So typically the first 2 numbers are going to be your pattern, right? So if it was like a 15020 or something like that, it's a 15-degree nozzle, 2 gallons a minute, right? And the way, and I think you might have touched on this before in some of your other videos, but the way that the kind of industry standard and that 301 standard work is that it's basically at a 4,000 psi. So just to kind of, again, have a baseline for all nozzles in the industry, they're all rated at 4,000 psi.
Okay, got it.
So if you have a 2.0 nozzle, basically it's telling you you're going to get 2 gallons on a 4,000 psi pressure washer. And it's just basically level setting it, right? So a 3.5 is giving you 3.5 at 4,000 psi. Okay. It's just a way of having an industry standard and sizing the nozzles. So again, the standard basically just says that your first 2 numbers are going to be the basically the width, right? 15, 25, 40, and then the next 3 numbers are going to be the 020, the 025. I think the reason that there's 3 digits is there actually is some, which is a giant nozzle, but it's a 12.5.
Yeah.
So you'd have 40, 125 for a 12.5 gallon. So that's kind of coming back to your question. If most of the nozzles and anybody who's a part of the PWMA, it's required that you have the marking on the nozzles. You'll be able to look at the size of the nozzle, and I would just never go less than what came with the pressure washer, right? So if it came with whatever it is, an 020 or an 018, that would be your minimum. You don't want to go below that, because the testing that's done, these are all certified, right, to UL 1776, whether it's tested by CSA or whoever, ETL. But what they're doing is there's a temperature requirement, right? Okay. So they're going to run the machine at the rated pressure and flow. They'll run it until they get a steady state, basically a constant pressure, right? Let it break in or whatever, so you get the constant pressure. And then they're taking temperature readings, and the temperature has to be, within the specification. So if you then put a smaller nozzle on there, there's a chance that you could overheat the motor and create an issue. So going larger is never a problem. You're just gonna have a little bit more flow, a little bit less pressure, but I would never go smaller.
So if you're going small, you're going at your own risk. Right. One of the tests that I did on we always go bigger because we're always trying to dial less pressure and more flow on most of the machines. Is we put an amp meter. We put an amp meter on the darn
plug it in,
current meter, whatever you call that thing. I think it's called an amp meter. And to get are we overamping the machine? Are we driving the machines? Because then you would theoretically have more heat. So that was our basic test to decide whether or not. Because you don't have infinite capability to say, you know what, I can buy this $100 machine and I can get whatever pressure I want by changing the nozzle. I can get whatever flow I want by changing the nozzle. It doesn't work that way. There's the pump has a certain output.
There's going to be limitations. So I think just looking at it, right, if you took 5 or 6 of the same branded pressure washer and took the pump and motor out and look at it, it basically may look the same, right? Until you get from a brush to an induction, right? But there's a couple things to be said there. The pump itself, we talked about a little bit earlier, you have that wobble plate, right, which you can think about as like the crankshaft in your car, right? So if you put a greater angle on your wobble plate, it's going to be pulling the piston down farther, basically doing a stroker motor, right? You're getting more displacement out of the engine. Same thing here, you're putting a different angle or a greater angle wobble plate in there, you're getting more displacement out of that pump. Well, when you do that, you're going to require more power out of the motor. And there's a lot of things that you can do in the motor itself, from the actual metals that you use to the windings, whether it's copper or aluminum, the amount of windings that are in there. So basically the efficiency of the motor, right? So the motor that looks the same in a $79 or $99 pressure washer versus one that's in a $200 pressure washer isn't always the exact same pressure. It looks the same, but it's not.
That's a good point. And so that's how they're able to, at times, the thing that frustrates us is that many times the output is the same, the pressure is the same. So it is the same pump. They're just putting in a different model.
Sometimes, if they're within 100 psi or something, it might be the same.
Yeah. But if we are measuring, we notice that on like the Karchers, the 1700 and 1800, or 17, 18, 19, and 2000, there was measurable pressure differences, even though the pumps all looked the same.
Right.
Actually, I think it was the 17, 18 were the same, 19, 2000 were the same.
Right.
They look like the same pumps, but all 4 of them had different outputs.
Right. Yep. And then, to your other point on price point, again, there's a little bit that goes into the design of the pump and motor, and it's going to affect, cost. But then, typically, as you go up into the larger pressures and higher retails, you're giving them, you're getting, I should say, some more features, right? So, as you pointed out, you have a small, 17, 1600 psi unit, and some of your videos you pointed out, that has like a little 20-foot hose in there, right?
Right.
And then, you go up into the, say, $150 range. Now you're typically getting, maybe a 25-foot hose, but you're also getting some wheels and a handle, right? So some of them have frames on them as they start getting into the, more expensive units. So again, it's performance and the features that you're getting.
It's funny how backwards they are. Like, you don't want a 50-foot power cord and a 20-foot hose. You want the opposite.
So
you want
30.
You want a 50-foot hose and a 20-foot power cord.
So I saw you talk about that in some of your videos. It's UL requirement is that you have to have a 35-foot with a GFCI. So that's why you'll see every one of these is a 35-foot.
Well, let me talk to the UL and set them straight. It's nonsense.
But you're right. There's no problem with just putting a longer hose on it, right? So it's an accessory, right? It might come with a 25, or some of the gas ones come with 35, 50-foot hoses. Yeah. But there's nothing wrong with going to the store and buying another hose and going 100 feet, right? Or buying one of yours that you have online. And then typically, I saw some of the testing that you did. It was interesting because you were saying, whether I was at 25 feet or 100 feet, I didn't see any difference in pressure. There was no pressure drop.
I really wasn't getting any difference in flow or pressure. And
the reason for that was the unit came with, probably most of these come with like a 5mm ID hose, right? And then you're putting a 3/8 ID hose on it. So you've made up the difference between 25 and 100 feet by going to a larger diameter hose. That's why you didn't really see any pressure drop.
I would have thought that going to a larger internal diameter hose, that I would have thought that a lot of these pumps would have a hard time with that, and they typically don't.
No.
They'd have a hard time maintaining pressure through that bigger supply line. I guess it's because the nozzle, the orifice dictates everything.
It's right, and that and the resistance, right? So if you had a unit that had 2,000 psi and you were using a 25-foot 5mm hose and you went out 100 feet, there's going to be a difference. But if you lower the resistance by going to a larger hose 100 feet out, now you've made up the difference. So the PWMA, again, it was formed back in 1997. There's currently 4 manufacturers, and amongst those 4 manufacturers, there's several brands, right? So there's Ryobi and Greenworks, Briggs & Stratton, Power Boss, Black Max. There's all different brands that are sold at different retailers. And the PWMA, again, is just there to help not only develop industry standards, but to give credibility, to the pressure washer industry as well, right? So we don't want to have, 3,000 psi pressure washers. That's really a 1,200 or 1,400 psi pressure washer, right? Some of the online stuff that you see out there is a little bit misleading. So PWMA is trying to kind of basically start doing a little bit more advertising. They never really did any marketing or advertising for the PWMA itself in the past. But reaching out to different bloggers and magazine companies, going to trade shows, trying to basically talk about what the PWMA is. And I mentioned earlier, any pressure washer manufacturer that sells in the U.S. portable pressure washers that are hand operated is welcome to join the PWMA.
But they all have to be UL approved in order to be sold, correct?
So the PWMA is more focused on the performance and the standards, where you're required as any manufacturer, right, to sell it in the U.S. It's going to have to be certified, right? So typically there's the CSA, which is it's a motor standard that's 22.2, and then there's the UL 1776, which is for pressure washers. So it's not necessarily a requirement of the PWMA, but it's a requirement for any manufacturer to sell a pressure washer in the U.S. that it's going to meet the either a UL or a CSA safety standard.
So I'd like to rally my troops and say, let's change the testing. Let's get rid of the pump head testing. And let's do like real world. What is when I get this in the box, when I get this out of the box, and I'm going to use it, and I would rally for, let's get rid of this max and min business. So if I can put in my my survey form here on video, I want rid of all max and min nonsense, because this doesn't do 80 psi at anything ever. And that's what it's saying. It's saying that it's 3.5 gallons a minute at 80 psi. Well, 80 psi is what comes out of the spigot, right? If 60, 70, 80, maybe 100 if you had some high pressure coming out of the spigot. So they're just basically just opening up the front of the pump head and letting it flow, and maybe that's how you get 3.5 gallons a minute. Because I've never tested a 3.5 gallon per minute machine. Shoot, my $4,000 Crenzo 23 amp machine got like 3.3 gallons per minute, and so I would want to see it change to where you had a single standard. This is the real world pressure with the nozzles provided. This is the real world flow with the nozzles provided, and this is what you're getting, instead of this min and max nonsense. And we're stuck on this. I can pull up my spreadsheet. It doesn't do 2,000 psi on the frickin' moon. It's doing more like 1,200 or 1,300 at the head. And actually, where I'm measuring it isn't even correct, because I'm getting it before it comes out the nozzle, because I don't have any way of getting that impact
you're still
pressure.
Measuring it in line. Right, which is fine. There actually is on every one of the standards. It actually tells you where you can kind of write in, with your recommendations. Of course,
so
you
do that, people. Even like my Krenzel pressure washer up here, it has a gauge on the pump head, and it'll read 1,400 psi, and then by the time it gets to the end of the line, it's 1,000 or 900. So that gauge to me is useless. It doesn't tell me how much impact I have on the thing that I'm cleaning, and so that's been my frustrations. The whole reason why I went through this whole diatribe of testing hundreds or 100 or so pressure washers was because I wanted to know, like, what is this really doing when I'm cleaning my car, and how much damage can I really have, and how much pressure am I really getting? Because these specs don't tell us anything useful. Yes, I like that there is a standard, and I think that's important. There's a baseline standard that can help you purchase and find quality, but I would like to have, and maybe it's good that we don't have this because it gives me something to do, but I would like to have an industry standard, real world, whether we use cleaning units or something like that. Cleaning units is a function of flow times pressure, and that gives you a cleaning unit, which you could use as a relative data point.
That's a good point. One of the things that we have actually talked about, the members of the board, is having a cleaning standard, right? So, what does it mean if it's a 2,000 or 3,000 or 1,500? At what flow?
No one actually knows what that means.
So to your point, like, you can say cleaning units, but two units can have the same cleaning unit, but one has higher pressure and lower flow, and vice versa, right?
Correct, yep.
But what does it actually do? How well does it actually clean? There has never been a cleaning standard, and maybe you can be a part of that and help us, right? Some of the members of the PWMA today have their engineers working on that, including the TTI Ryobi group is actually helping to work on that. There are so many variables, right? When you talk about
distance,
what surface,
right? The type of
how
surface.
dirty is it? Greasy? Is it moldy? Is it right? So how do you
and
dial it in?
I think the test that we devised tells us that.
Right.
What pressure am I getting right at the end? And the only thing I think it could do to improve that is, could I put the nozzle, fix it in some sort of jig, and then if I could measure what is actually bouncing off, off the meter. I don't know I'm sure that sort of equipment exists, but what does that cost?
Right.
And how is that calibrated?
There's a lot of different ways that you can rate the pressure washers, right? PSI and flow, GPM is the common standard. And again, kind of back in 97, that was launched, where the standard came out in 98, but when everybody started working on it in 97, you had a lot of the pressure washer manufacturers that came together and said, how do we take out those variables, right? Where can you get the same consistent number for every pressure washer? It doesn't matter what hose, what nozzle, what trigger handle. How are you going to be able to get the same number every time? And came up with the PW101 saying that we're going to plug directly into the head, because it takes out every other variable. So that's the number that you're getting, and it's a real number. And again, it's a good true baseline, where if you're buying any pressure washer as part of the PWMA, if you bought a 2,000 psi from this company and a 2,000 psi from this company, it's going to be the same. And if you bought a 3,000 from both of them, you're going to have that same increase in performance. So you have a standard.
So how does that happen? So we're using the Briggs & Stratton because that has the most reliable data on the front, or the most robust data on the front. So it's giving me 2,000 psi rating at 1.1 GPM. So they're using a certain size orifice to measure that to get 1.1 GPM.
Sure.
So why isn't there a standard orifice size that they're using, or is there? So is there a standard orifice that you're measuring all of these with?
So again, you're getting number at the head, but you're using the accessories that come with the pressure washer, right? So if you bought a 2,000 psi pressure washer, then they're giving you this particular nozzle and this hose, and to achieve that number, right? So it's required that when you're doing the testing, you have to use the accessories that came with it. So you're using that nozzle that came with that unit. And
so, but they're not using that for GPM, for flow.
Same nozzle. But so now if, let's say example, the Ryobi is telling you 2000 1.2. That's with the same nozzle, right? So you don't see a maximum, or you don't see.
So they were able to put a soap nozzle on there, and that's how they're getting 3.5 gallon per minute rating.
Right. So if you're going to advertise different numbers for your pressure and your flow, and you're doing that by using different nozzles, then you have to show that, right? If you just had 2,000 PSI 3.5 GPM, that would be extremely misleading, because there's no way on earth that you're getting 2,000 3.5 out of an electric pressure washer that you're plugging into 120 15 amp circuit. So they're adding the language in there showing you that, okay, well, I have two different nozzles here. At 2,000 PSI, I'm getting 1.1, and at 3.5, I'm getting 80 PSI.
So that 3.5, that nozzle has to be in the box.
Yes, absolutely.
And so it's soap nozzle, and they can't do it without a nozzle on.
Correct. That's the no, that doesn't.
I just don't know.
Yeah.
Do I get 3.5 gallons a minute if I turn this hose on? I guess I do.
So you get about 5. Typically you have at least 5 gallons a minute coming out of there. It was funny that you brought that up, because that is the other number that they use here, 1.65 gallons per minute with the nozzle at open minimum pressure, right? So what that means is remove the nozzle. And just let the water kind of ooze out the end of the wand. And their argument is that, hey, you can use it that way, right? You can take the nozzle out and just use it to basically almost as a garden hose, right? Just let the water kind of come out the end of the wand. So that's what they're saying here. We talked about this earlier, how they're getting their PSI, and then a 1.65 gallons per minute is with the nozzle removed is basically what they're telling you there.
Right. I'm going to ship my Camaro to the moon. And then I'm going to ship a dyno there, and then that's how I'm going to get my horsepower rating. It's 1 million horsepower.
I think that's probably maybe the most, and like the best analogy you can give almost. So like car manufacturers advertise horsepower.
Sure.
But it's just what the engine makes. It's not power to the wheels.
Right.
So like whenever you do, wheel horsepower, it's always less than what the motor actually does.
Sure.
So maybe that's kind of similar.
But measuring wheel horsepower is not very accurate.
It doesn't, right? I mean, the suspension setup and the weight of the vehicle and the horsepower and the torque and all of those
temperature that day and all
it all
factors.
goes into the performance of the vehicle, right? It's not.
Whereas they can put an engine on an engine dyno in a room that's humidity and temperature controlled, that has a certain amount of air conditions or conditions with how much air is flowing in.
And that all goes into that PW101 standard. I mean, we didn't get into like all the specifics, right? But it goes through in very detail that you have to have between 40 and 80 psi of water pressure. So you can't crank up to 100 pressure and try to force some more pressure, right? It has to be at an ambient temperature. Let's say, I don't know, off the top of my head, it might be between like 50 and 70 something degrees. So telling you what temperature it has to be at. That, especially for a gas unit, to your point, right? A car engine or any engine is greatly affected by the temperature and the humidity that day, right? So all of those things are factored in when you're doing the testing. It's all flatline.
So I would also make the case that some of these manufacturers that are willing to adopt a standard, they get so concerned about what everybody else is doing that part of the reason why we're using these funky numbers like this is so that they can compete. I would argue, why not just create a whole new audience of people that don't shop based on the spec, and you spend all of your time and energy convincing why the pump is better, why the pressure washer is better, and you're publishing real specs, and we harp on that real spec and go down that path instead of just so worried about what everybody else is doing.
I agree. And, without getting too much into it, if you remember years ago, there was a class action lawsuit against horsepower ratings on like lawnmower engines, right? These small vertical engines. And that was because there was no standard, right? So this guy's using peak horsepower at this performance and this one's using it, right? So they were all just trying to put a higher peak horsepower on their motors.
Put it on the box, right? Or on the label, on the sticker.
More power for the price, right? It ended up being a class action lawsuit that was settled to kind of, and then now there is a standard that everybody's using. And in fact, most people have gone away from the horsepower because who cares, right? I have a 22-inch push mower, does it cut the grass or not, right? So a lot of them maybe just will tell you the CCs, right? This one has 163, versus 173. So it's like I got a little bigger engine on this one than this one. But what's important is, that it's actually getting the job done. Right?
I just think that, if you're a manufacturer, if I'm a manufacturer, I want nice, intelligent customers. I don't want to assume that my customers are stupid. I want to assume that my customers, that I can educate them by just telling them a few simple things. And I guess maybe that's just naive. Maybe that's just not how the world works.
Well, I think, what we were talking about just a little bit, Ed, that's never been done before, is to come up with a cleaning standard, right? And then take out all the other variables. Take out, how you're getting to the pressure and how you're getting to the flow. Today, that's the only thing we have to measure using on pressure washers, right? So we have to take what we have and be fair about it and create a standard so that the companies are all, rating them to the same standard, so it's equal and fair. But it's not to say that I agree with you. I think that it would be great if we had a cleaning performance standard, right? So you can actually advertise on the box, how much you're going to be able to clean within a certain period.
I just think that and this is what I've spent so much time educating people, because the specs on that, that $1,100 machine are worse than any of these here.
Right.
If you were to publish, the specifications, but there's a real difference.
Right.
And that requires a bit of a leap of faith of the consumer.
Sure.
That we're giving them the real standard. What I'm hoping to overcome is I'm showing them in real time on camera. Right. Here's what we're getting. There's the stopwatch. Here's the trigger being pulled.
Sure.
And then that can provide a little bit different information for the world.
And that's a great database that you have. I mean, you've done at this point, 100 different electric pressure washers. I mean, an insane amount of data. I think over 20 different videos I've watched.
It makes me want to build an actual testing rig, build a testing bench, and then get even more accurate data where it's timed to the millisecond, you know, where we can get really accurate stuff.
But you can go on your website under pressure washers, and you have that page that basically has all the different or many of the different brands, right, including most of these. And it has a lot of the popular models, and you know what
this is what we're getting. So this is what we're getting out of the box, and then this is what we're getting if we modify it to make it work best for washing a car. And I'm hoping to modify it where we're not overdriving the machine, where in most cases we're opening the nozzle up a bit and making it run a little cooler, which should theoretically allow it to last a little longer.
Yep.
You know, gosh, I couldn't imagine being an engineer having to talk to a buyer of a big box store. It's all about price, and it's all about that number, and that's why it is this way. Because the customer, which is the big box store or the big, you know, chain, the customer, that's all they know, because they don't know any of this stuff that we're talking about here, and so they you know, they want it to look pretty. The prettier it looks, the easier it is to sell.
Yeah. So, I mean, you know, again, today we're really kind of focusing a lot on the smaller electric pressure washers because that's the majority of pressure washers, you know, being sold in the market, right? And they're great for, you know, using them for cleaning vehicles and things like that, right? But for sure, you know, we have gas pressure washers with Honda, you know, GX360 commercial grade engines and triplex pumps, and you know, and these cool wheelbarrow frames, and these are the ones that the engineers are probably getting more excited about, right? Because that's just a badass unit, right? That you can like cut through logs with that thing, you know. But it's again, it's all relative to you know, what is the customer using it for, right? A customer that's going to wash their car doesn't need a you know, $1,000, you know.
See, he's on the not need part. Everything we do here is unnecessary. Every single thing that chair you're sitting on is a $600 chair. You know, this hose behind you here is a $300 hose. Sure. You know, these are a $350 set of buckets. Yep. And you know, you don't need any of that. This is French airline that we're using for our water line.
And you said it a million times, there's people that drive Honda Civics that are pretty cool little cars and they're perfectly happy. And there's guys that drive 911 GTS Porsches. Do you need a 911? No, but it's cool.
Right. So, and that's the thing for, you know, I think for pressure washing, I don't care if you're using it once a year. You know, if you've reached some sort of modicum of success and that money doesn't mean that much to you, and that one time a year is something you want to enjoy the process, I'm going to buy, you know, the commercial grade machine. Now you have to draw the line somewhere.
Or people that buy, you know, big commercial stainless steel, you know, stoves for their kitchen at home.
Heck yeah.
You just want to have that badass commercial thing, right? That's okay too.
It's all, to me, it's not about showing off. It's not about bragging. It's about that my user experience on things that I value. You know, so I value grilling, even though I'm not a professional at it. I'm not even very good at it. But, you know, I have aspired. I finally bought a decent grill and I got it. And now I'm like, I don't even like that one. I want a better one. You know, and so that's, to me, that's the pursuit. And there's lots of other people like that. Most people aren't that way. And that's why all these exist, because most people, you know, driving their Honda Accord.
Well, that's what you're passionate about, right? So if you're passionate about cooking, you want the commercial grade range. If you're passionate about cleaning your car, you want, you know, to have a good experience washing it, right? So it's really what you're passionate about. You know, I know you hate like the price point thing, right? But in the tool world, it typically is, you know, whether it's a drill or a pressure washer, somebody that's going to use it, you know, infrequently, and somebody that's going to use it every day, because that's, you know, what they do for a living, right? And then there's probably
you're talking, you know, most of the world has finite resources. I live in a world where I aspire to have infinite resources. Right? That's the aspiration, have infinite resources. That way, everything around, you know, even the shorts I'm wearing are better. You know, and the thing I've figured out is that I don't have enough time. There's only so much time and energy to figure out what are the best shorts. You know, what are the best? What's the best spatula for know flipping pancakes? You know, I'm chasing it, but you know, I'll probably die and only make it 10% of the way there. But at least that's the aspiration.
Absolutely.
Cool. I think
from what we talked about a little bit earlier, I think it might be cool to actually use you for some of the I guess as we're developing a cleaning standard, I'll give you an example. So Consumer Reports rates pressure washers, right? And a lot of times they're just basically going off whatever number is on whatever box at a price point. But then they also do their own in-house pressure washer testing, right? And if you see the videos, that the way they're doing the cleaning test is they're basically taking these kind of light panels. They're kind of like I call it like perforated on one side and smooth on the other, right? So they take them and they're basically masking off some squares and painting them, and then using the pressure washer to see how quickly or how effectively they can clean the panels, or how many they can clean within a certain amount of time, to be able to say, okay, well, I was able to clean more panels faster, or a greater surface area faster with this unit than this unit. So instead of just saying, okay, well, this is the features, right? This is how much it weighed, or the wheels, or the length of the hose, and the PSI and GPM. What else can they? How else can they rate the pressure washer? By actual cleaning performance, right? So they tried to come up with their own standard to say, well, this is how we're going to do cleaning performance. And again, we'd love to get to the point where the members of the PWMA can actually come out with a cleaning standard, and then work with people like consumers to actually make that an industry standard. And then again, consumers or guys like yourself, when you're doing testing, you'd be able to have that standard to show the cleaning performance of all these different units.
So I still think that if you're the PWMA is a sophisticated, nonprofit organization that is speaking. Right now you're speaking to idiots, but I think you should be speaking to the intelligent people, right? And so no intelligent person in the world should ever read Consumer Reports, RTings, Amazon reviews. You should not be doing that. You should be searching for the expert. Like, so let's say, for instance, I was looking to buy a high-end set of headphones. I'm not going to go to frickin' Consumer Reports and read the report. They don't even know what good headphones are. I'm looking for that guy with like an oscilloscope in the background. So I find this guy's name's like Hans Beekman or something like that. And the guy, he's like reviewing. He's clearly very passionate about it.
Right.
Has spent his life searching for this. The only problem with Hans is Hans would never tell me, this is the one you need to buy. So I wanted him to just tell me, buy those headphones. And so I think that there is a huge, international, global opportunity for a pressure washer company, even if you're making cheap stuff, to go and to just, all you have to do is just not assume the people you're talking to are stupid, and focus on the passion, focus on the, again, in pressure washing, find some guy like me. Who is a bit misinformed. He doesn't know everything, but is clearly passionate about it, that has the right influential audience that would then go and make this standard really valuable. Because that's the real value of Obsessed Garage. Is not me, it's not Tommy, it's not the people here, it's the people that are buying from us that are then influencing everybody around them.
Right.
And so now all those people know what an orifice nozzle is. They all know, what's a good pressure washer, what's not a good pressure washer. They even know, in the entry level, what tested well and what didn't do well.
Right.
And then that audience goes out, and then they spread it to 10 or 12 or 15 people in their life.
Right.
And then those 10 or 12 people spread it. And so you take this niche way of approaching a niche, certification, and we essentially teach people that want to know, instead of trying to ram it down the people that don't care.
Right. Sure, and I think to your point, it's you have to market or advertise the products in a way that everybody can understand, right? So you don't want to insult the people that do know a lot about pressure washers and know what the PSI and the GPM means, right? So they can go and they can further research and see what the standards are. But then there's people that just don't care, right? It's like, hey, I want to go to the store, I want to spend $100, $150, I want to go wash my patio, right?
And so the don't care people are looking for somebody smart to tell them what to get so they don't have to care.
So
that's the key.
You need to simply say, this is going to work. right? And it's not that they're not intelligent or anything. It's just that
they don't need different things they're interested
They're not
in.
passionate about that. They don't need to know all the details. Just tell me for $150 I can take this home and wash my patio, right?
You know, it's funny. I get accused all the time of yelling and screaming about this, about people calling people stupid, when I'm the one who's assuming that people aren't stupid. The very few people are stupid. Very, very few people, and those people aren't buying pressure washers. They're just trying to find their next meal. But the vast majority of people, it's just a question of whether or not they care and are passionate or even have an interest in it, versus those that, like I did this the other day when I bought tile. Like, I don't care. I just want the tile to look good. I don't know anything about tile. I don't want to know anything about tile. And then I bought some tile and I bought the wrong stuff. And so what I'm spending all of my time on is having these weird conversations about these weird numbers that really nobody should care about. So that way we can acquire a body of knowledge to get to the point to where the guy that isn't stupid, that just wants to be told what to do, we have some provable reasoning why we know enough to enough to be dangerous to say, this is what you want to buy.
Right.
Here's 3 options. That's when your price point comes in, right?
Sounds like good.
Cut all this part out. Maybe we'll put that in the bonus footage. Yeah, he's been worried about me having this. He's watched some videos, so he knows what to expect.
I'll say, Consumer Reports, this is a Matt Moore opinion.
Not an opinion. This is real world experience. Stop reading reviews on Amazon. It's useless. I don't want to know what Joe Smith in Poughkeepsie, New York, thinks about a pressure washer. He doesn't know anything about it.
Right.
All this stuff we just talked about, he doesn't know any of that. So why would I care what his review is? Because it broke. Well, it broke because it froze because he left it outside, or some. They always leave out that part, the real story behind it. So that's why I think reviews are worthless.
Yeah.
We don't have reviews. I don't want anybody's review. Stop, people go in our Facebook group and have a review. The only reviews that people have is if they absolutely love it and want to justify the purchase, or they hate it because something broke. Yeah. And usually it broke because they did something stupid.
Yeah, and I think as far as reviews are concerned, to your point, if you really want to get some knowledge from it, you got to read them. Right? If you're just kind of like reading the titles or overall numbers.
But even then, you're reading a bunch of nonsense words.
But if somebody's telling you, this is what I used it for and it worked well, or this is what I used it for and it didn't work well, there is some knowledge and data you can pull from that.
Well, so on B&H Photo, I'll give you that. On B&H Photo, there's a bunch of professional photographers and professional video people. Mm-hmm. They're the ones that are sometimes leaving reviews, and you can see who's a professional and who's not. Now you've got some value. Yeah. But if you're looking at a Greenworks pressure washer review on Lowe's.com, save yourself the pain, because you're wasting you just sucked like 2 or 3 IQ points out of your head by doing something like that, because those people don't know anything. Don't do that. So how do people figure out is there a PWMA website?
There is. It's www.pwma.org.
Okay.
And again, if you go onto the website, there are some educational pieces, basically like, how you would qualify, I guess you'd say, for, what you're using the pressure washer for, right? Do I need a 15 or 2,000 PSI, or should I go buy a much larger, 3,000, 2.5, right? So it kind of has a little chart in there that helps you with like basically your decision on what range of pressure washer you need to buy for the job that you're doing. There's some maintenance tips and stuff like we talked a little bit about today for storing a pressure washer, disconnecting, using pump protector. If you have a gas unit, make sure you drain the fuel or put some fuel stabilizer in there so it's not all gummed up the next time you go to use it, right? So you find a lot of that on there. All the standards are listed on there. And then of course, the members and brands that are currently a part of the association are all on the website.